Ani, bonjour, Tanzi Sega, welcome everyone. My name is Nochmoen Mushkogiashk, better known as Philip Cote III. I belong to the Underwater Panther clan, and I'm also a band member of Moose Deer Point First Nations. Today, I'm here to share with you a traditional land acknowledgement. ArtworxTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art 2021, and the City of Toronto would like to acknowledge our presence on the land that has been the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee peoples since time immemorial. And in 1805, with the signing of the Toronto Purchase, is now the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As we reach back to those first Torontonians, we remember our Mother Earth through the 7 grandfather teachings: wisdom, bravery, respect, honesty, truth, humility, and love. The stories of each of these nations endure and continue to guide our thoughts and actions on this land. And as we acknowledge our Mother Earth, we acknowledge the medicine wheel and its teachings. We recognize the 4 directions: north, south, east, and west, and the 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. It is these 4 seasons that represent the circle of life. Nindanoe Maganidak, which means all my relations, which means we are all related. Aho, miigwech matakuyasan. Hey y'all, oh yeah.
Hello? Am I on now? That was weird. A rocky start. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Rebecca Carbin. I am principal and founder of ART+PUBLIC UnLtd, and I have been working with the incredible ArtworxTO team on several aspects of the ArtworxTO program, and my own team, Sagan McIsaac and Michelle Chaloshchik, on its rollout, in particular the ArtworxTO Live at 5 talks. I am a middle-aged woman with short hair and glasses. I am in a home office with a small bookshelf, an overflowing bookshelf behind me. I'm excited to be back here with you for our 6th episode of ArtworxTO Talk series. And I'm making a note to myself and to others, but particularly myself, to remember to keep a slow pace for our ASL interpreters. ArtworxTO is a full year of public art programming that is unfolding across the city of Toronto and aims to greatly diversify the opportunities for artists and audiences to engage with art. We have over 1,400 artists involved in this program and more than 300 new installations, murals, screenings, performances, and events taking place. The year kicked off in the last quarter of 2021, and I'm really excited about what we have rolling into 2022. Over the year, ArtworxTO Live at 5 talks will highlight some of these projects among other amazing public art initiatives taking place around town. The ArtworxTO Community Hubs program in particular is turning over all of its exhibitions right now, and so do take an opportunity to check out the ArtworxTO website and find out about this exciting roster of exhibitions from emerging Toronto-based curators. Live at 5 is a series of talks about some overarching issues within public art practices today. And as we developed this program in the midst of a global pandemic that began as a health crisis and morphed into a crisis that engaged politics, social economics, and so many aspects of civic engagement, collective living, and public life, we decided to assemble our overarching issues with a central concern for different aspects of art and health: personal, social, societal, physical, mental, and emotional. We want to engage with some of the numerous incredible programs and projects that Toronto's artists and art workers are undertaking this and every year, and to invite discussion around the important intersection of art and wellness, when, if, and how art can better our personal, physical, social, emotional, mental health, individually and collectively. So we've developed a program that will examine 5 themes over 10 events, and this means giving our audience and moderators a chance to think about points of tension in chapter 1 of each discussion point, and then deepen that kind of thinking and conversation in chapter 2. Our earlier talks are available on demand if you missed them, or if you just love them so much you want to watch them again. Tonight, we're going into the second of 2 chapters on access, arts and accessibility. Today's discussion centers around projects exploring questions about access and accessibility. If public art is about expression and communication in public, how do such questions inform a conversation about how public art comes to be in a place, to what end, and for whom? And I'm particularly interested in having this conversation in an online platform. The internet as a public space is a topic that I've been interested in for many years, and our collective experience over the past 2 years has really come to change how we understand the role of our virtual forums play in the development of a collective narrative. And so with this talk, there is a folding in on itself, where we look at publicness and access. Having this talk online and recorded opens up all sorts of accessibility potential, but we do not want to fall into the trap of thinking that everyone has access to computers, Wi-Fi, and other essential components of access to this particular public space. We have some amazing panelists tonight, and I'm so excited to hear about from these artists and art practitioners about their practice and how their practice informs thinking about access and accessibility. But first, a couple of housekeeping notes. Once again, speak slowly and as clearly as possible. And a note to, we're live for 60 minutes. So if you're watching us live on YouTube, feel free to type your questions for the panelists in the comments. We will have a question period near the end of the hour. And if you want to rewatch this video again later, this episode and all of our Live at 5 videos are available at the ArtworxTO on-demand media library. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing moderator and turn the floor over to our moderator and panelists. They are far more interesting and exciting than I am. Sean Lee is Director of Programming at Tangled Art Disability. Sean is an artist and curator exploring the notion of disability art as the last avant-garde. Orienting towards a CRIP horizon, he is interested in the transformative possibilities of CRIP community building and accessible curatorial practices that desire the ways disability can disrupt. Sean holds a BA in Arts Management and Studio from the University of Toronto, Scarborough, and is currently the Director of Programming, as I said, at Tangled Art and Disability. In addition to his role at Tangled, Sean is an independent lecturer, speaker, and writer, adding his insights and perspectives to conversations surrounding disability arts across Canada, the United States, and internationally. Sean currently sits on the board of CARFAC Ontario, Creative Users Projects, and is chair of the Toronto Arts Council's Visual Arts, Media Arts Committee, and a member of the Ontario Arts Council's Deaf and Disability Advisory Group. It is an absolute honor to have you, Sean, here, as well as our panelists. Over to you, Sean.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Rebecca. And thanks to ArtworxTO for once again hosting this wonderful series. So I'm Sean, and I'm just going to start with a brief description of myself before I introduce our esteemed panel. I am somebody who is male presenting. I use he, they pronouns. I'm an East Asian Chinese person with light skin. I'm somebody who's also visibly disabled. So my back curves and my shoulders are uneven. And if we were to meet in person, I'd be quite short of stature. I've got black hair that runs past my shoulders at this point. I was just telling the other panelists, I haven't cut it since the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. So this is 2 years plus of not having a haircut. I have light skin, and I am wearing these like steampunk glasses. They're green with gold rims that kind of float on the frames. I'm wearing a black t-shirt that kind of pokes through. You can sort of see it says, "The future is accessible," and it's a t-shirt designed by a disability YouTuber named Annie Segarra. So today we're joined by three incredible artists, Ophira Calof, Kim Fullerton, and Jess Sash. And I'll just tell you a little bit about each of them. So Ophira Calof, who uses she, they pronouns, is a multi-award-winning disabled writer, performer, and producer. Her work weaves together music, comedy, and storytelling, centering disability and chronic illness experience, and pushing to crypt the script. They co-created the sketch comedy review, Generally Hospital, and her solo show, Literally Titanium, premiered at the 2020 Next Stage Theater Festival. Ophira also works as a curator, consultant, and keynote speaker with projects including COVID-19 Through a Disability Lens, storytelling and filmmaking project, Display in partnership with ArtworxTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art 2021 to 2022, and Access CBC. Kim Fullerton, who uses she, her pronouns, has worked in the Canadian visual arts sector since 1983 as an artist, curator, writer, administrator, publicist, consultant, and founder of Akimbo Art Promotions. In 2016, she spearheaded the organization and website Access Visual Art to promote barrier-free galleries in Ontario in partnership with ArtworxTO. From 2015 to 17, Fullerton was a member of the board of directors at Tangled Art Disability, and in 2018 co-chaired ArtsBuild Ontario's Accessibility Advisory Committee, which produced a webinar series and toolkit. In 2017, she was awarded the RCA Medal by the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts for her service and contributions to the visual arts in Canada, and in 2020 received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Ontario Association of Art Galleries. So Jess Sash, who uses they, them pronouns, presently living in Toronto, Jess Sash is an artist, writer, and dancer who addresses the negotiations of bodies moving in public and private space and the work of their care. Often found marrying poetry with large-scale sculptural forms, their work has been presented and supported by dance makers, the Centre de Création et Recherche au Vertigo in Montreal, Harbourfront Centre, among other centers. Their work has appeared in and been profiled by Now Magazine, The Peak, Canadian Art, C Magazine, CB2, the Canadian Journal of Poetry and Critical Writing, Mobilizing Metaphor, Art, Culture, and Disability Activism in Canada, and the 40th anniversary edition of Our Bodies, Ourselves. And so now it's my absolute pleasure to bring Ophira onto the spotlight.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You know, it wouldn't be a Zoom call if the second that happened, a dog didn't start barking in the background. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really exciting to be here, especially with my fellow panelists and host. To give a brief description of myself, I'm a white disabled person with short dark hair that I went the route of cutting it myself during the pandemic. So, you know, it is what it is. And I have I have dark plastic glasses, and I'm wearing a white and navy blue neck brace. I also tend to use my hands quite a lot when I talk, and just will try very hard not to knock my computer over while I am doing that. I'm here to chat a little bit about Display, which was a public arts project that was presented in the fall of 2021 as part of ArtworxTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art 2021-2022. And I made a couple of slides that I would love to have brought up, mostly to keep myself focused as I talk a little bit. So I'll just give a second for that. Oh, I think amazing. The first slide says display. It's an introductory slide, and we can go on to the next one. So this slide says crypt the script, and I wanted to start by just speaking a little bit to my artistic practice, which I've really struggled with words to be able to communicate clearly, and I've arrived at crypt the script as a phrase that feels good to me. And when I say that, it sort of means to disrupt our processes, spaces, and stories in a way that really centers disability and chronic illness knowledge, identities, and experiences. So kind of moving beyond the idea of accessible art, or as art as something that exists, that then in accessibility, that something exists separately, and you then sort of make art accessible. And thinking more of disability arts, disability aesthetics, how is access artistic within its own right, within itself, and how is art as a form of communication and connection a form of accessibility itself? And really thinking through sort of in your practice, not just what you can make work accessible in a very sort of stark way of thinking, but what kind of work allows people to thrive, both in terms of their audience experience and the artistic experience of creation. So that's a little bit about sort of the ideas that sort of underline some of these questions that I've tried to look at through my work. And so let's go to the next slide, where there's the graphic for display, big bold letters, dis/play. It's a little bit of a play on words, disability, dis, probably self-explanatory. The idea for this public arts project really came about through conversations within community of people just feeling so invisible, particularly with discussions around COVID and at the start, and to be honest, throughout the pandemic, in sort of media coverage and policy decisions, and quite literally out and about in the streets. And so we wanted to find a way to really take up space, even when it wasn't possible for community to gather in large numbers in person. And so the idea was to create a video, sort of a musical video that involves storytelling and artwork that could be projected onto exterior building walls throughout the city. And I took that idea to the Real Abilities Film Festival of Toronto, and we applied as a partnership project with ArtworxTO, and we're lucky enough to get to build the thing. So the next slide is a graphic that we sort of put out there as a call for submissions. It says, project display, how do you want to be seen? And it was a call for submissions from disabled creatives. At first I thought, oh yeah, people, we don't often get to be seen on our own terms. So let's just ask, how do we want to be seen? Didn't quite think about the huge breadth and can of worms that answer really opens. I truly don't really know how to answer that question myself. But we put out this call for submissions with two streams. One was for spotlight storytellers, which we had decided we'd sort of select 3 main stories that would record 2-minute long pieces. And then also just for content. So photography, artwork, videos, anything that really responded to this idea, however literal or abstract, of how do you want to be seen? And the response was overwhelming and incredible and completely took me aback. We put the call out on Facebook, and then I just refreshed the Google form to see what had happened. And within like 2 hours, there were already 12 submissions. Like, it really, really went to show that there's so many people just waiting for the platform, with work just ready to go. And I immediately really wanted to be sure that in sort of curating this piece, I wasn't imposing my idea of sort of, this is how disabled people want to be seen, and putting that idea out in front of the world. So for the storytellers, we put together a jury of a number of deaf and disabled artists to sort of tease out the themes through all the submissions and try to select pieces that best reflected themes that seem to be both pressing and often, sort of underrepresented with the community, within the community. And for the artwork, we made the decision to feature at least one piece from every single person who submitted, so that it wasn't a matter of choosing, what the answer to the question was, and was more of a mosaic of all of the multitude of answers that people have to that question. And we ended up with 3 brilliant storytellers, Jasmine Noseworthy Persad, Winter Plum, and Michelle Dumas, who each created sort of 2-minute long pieces that were their answers to that question, how do you want to be seen? So we had our content, we had our storytellers, then it was time to build the project. And we can move to the next slide. And really thinking through sort of access as art. So that involves an extensive process of community consultations. We worked with Deaf Spectrum to weave in deaf interpretation and really think through captioning. For descriptions of the art itself, we asked each artist to submit 3 to 5 words that described their artistic style or their intention, the intention of their work. And the words that we got back, there was a huge range from things like happy to something describing the materials like graphic or charcoal, or self-expression, or, a really broad range of words. And those words became the lyrics of a song that underscored the art, sort of creating this multi-sensory experience where the artist's intention and style was communicated both visually and through music. And we also created an accompanying zine for the piece that had sort of a collection of more literal alt text for all of the art, along with all of the artist bios and a collection of all of their own words as well. And that was created by Beyond Access. It's over 100 pages long because there was so much work and it was so incredible, and we really wanted a way to showcase all of it. But the interesting thing about the process meant that everything kind of had to happen at once. Usually in a production, you kind of have stages. In a music video, you start with a song and you have the soundtrack, then you film, add the visuals, then you might caption it at the end, and that's sort of your production timeline. But for us, in order to write the song, we needed to know the descriptive words from the artists. And in order to know sort of the order of those descriptive words, we needed to set all of the visuals. But in order to set the visuals properly, we needed to know the music to line up the timing according to the underscoring song. So it was a very sort of chicken and egg process, and made more challenging by the fact that none of us were in the same space. This whole process was built in sort of a virtual capacity, physically isolated. And, there were over 50 artists involved in this project, all kind of working within this piecemeal approach. And truly, it was one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had, getting to have those negotiations of timeline, of, sort of, again, cripping the process. How do we find these ways to create our art in collaboration with each other? What does that mean for the final project? And how do we build that collaborative space over distance? So in the end, we sort of had our finished piece that was projected, but we also released a version of the piece online, partly in terms of sort of opening up access, understanding that, an in-person presentation was not in the cards for everyone and truly never will be, right? We all have different needs, but also sort of honoring the way that this piece was built. It felt very fitting. So I just have a couple of pictures of what the finished piece looked like. So on the next slide, this is a picture that I took on my phone at our first presentation that was at the Walmer Road Baptist Church. And that presentation was done in partnership with Task Design Build and We Are Process. And the screenshot, there's sort of 3 windows. You can see it stage level interpreting in one. And in the other 2 windows, this is a moment from Jasmine's story. And there's some of Jasmine's artwork and a recording of their piece with captioning on the bottom of the building. Also figuring out where captioning lines up and where interpretation lines up on different buildings as we created different pop-up experiences was a really neat challenge. The second image is a shot that, again, I took on my cell phone of a piece of art, and this was projected outside Artscape Winchwood Barns. And there's a small child sort of looking at the piece, and the top of their head in a little yellow rain jacket is lit up as they were sort of looking at the artwork. The connection of being there in person, having people come by, there were a lot of tears, a lot of like happy tears and meaningful tears. It was also October and November, so those tears were frozen to people's faces. Lots of people who came back night after night looking at different venues and just chatting, bringing by hot chocolate and tea and different things for the community. And I think there's one more image. And this was at the end of the piece. We had in big bold letters, "I am here," projected. And our final venue was at the Miles Nadal JCC outside in a parking lot, sort of the metro parking lot, looking at the back of the building. So it was a really magical experience, a big learning experience, and the power of just seeing all of this work huge in the city. I still don't quite have the words for how impactful it was. But public art, I mean, this is, I think, what it's about in many ways. And I will stop talking now because I really want to hear about everything that my fellow panelists are here to chat about.
Great. Thank you so much, Ophira. What a powerful work and such an incredible process. Thank you for taking us through it. I'd like to bring Kim up to the spotlight now. Kim. Oh, Kim, you're on mute.
Sorry. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Sean, for your introduction from a few minutes ago. I'd also like to thank ART+PUBLIC UnLtd and City of Toronto ArtworxTO for inviting me to this discussion. A brief self-description. I'm a white woman in my 60s with short gray hair and black framed glasses. I'm wearing a black shirt and I'm seated in a manual wheelchair. And behind me is a wall of framed artworks. First slide, please. Recently, I went to a film in a newly renovated indie theater here in Calgary, where I'm living now. The manager showed me to wheelchair seating, which was in a dark area at the back of the theater where an entire row of seats had been removed and where I would have to sit alone. I looked at this and said to him, "It seems you think people who use wheelchairs don't want to sit beside their friends." I could see this stunned them, and they said they hadn't actually thought of this. This has been my experience sitting on public art juries. Deaf, mad, neurodiverse, and disability identified people are not invited from the beginning stages to contribute to design and oversight of competition guidelines and policy, or in the case of most theaters, to seating design. Next slide, please. On public art juries, I would normally be the only person with a visible disability and often the only person speaking to accessibility issues. And we would be reviewing proposals that were far, far, far along in the process. For instance, this artwork by Studio Chemists, led by Stephen Bates, won the competition on one of the juries I sat on and was installed at the Forensic Services and Coroners Complex in Toronto. The studio said this about their work. The final sculpture offers a place of comfort through discrete seating and shading opportunities where visitors can find relief in order to think and gather strength. I pointed out the obvious. There was nowhere for a person using a wheelchair to discreetly park and sit and experience this comfort and strength. The seating was designed entirely with ambulatory people in mind. But this competition had not incorporated any directives to artists and teams at the onset to consider accessibility. There's been a drastic inequality of access and inclusion that has led to the almost wholesale exclusion of deaf, mad, neurodiverse, and disabled artists from winning public art commissions or from designing those competitions in the first place. In public art competitions, there are many people and stages involved: art consultants and coordinators, clients, project managers, cities, artists, designers, architects, engineers, fabricators, etc. Developing an accessibility audit as guideline for public art competitions before they begin is crucial, so that all these people are aware of the guidelines and are held to them. And it goes without saying, advisory groups of disabled people must be involved in creating those guidelines, that many of us need to be invited to the table, recognizing that disability experiences are not all the same. Those that lead processes, public art consultants and city public art coordinators, must open themselves to learning how to access and talk to the disabled community in a truly meaningful way, so that learning and knowledge are exchanged, so that both lead and so that both learn. Many templates and toolkits already in existence can guide this process. Here are just 3. Next slide, please. In 2017, I co-led Access Visual Arts Design and Development in partnership with ArtsBuild and Akimbo. ArtsBuild was already using a 52-point audit to assess the accessibility features of public venues such as restaurants and attractions. AVA adapted the audit to create an in-person audit and online survey of visual art venues. The access information gathered is available in this widget used by 3 websites: AVA, ArtsBuild, and Akimbo. Next slide, please. This toolkit is a collaboration between Humber College and Tangled Art and Disability. Deaf, mad, and disability identified students and artists took the lead in researching and responding to the question, how do we make the presentation of art inclusive and accessible? The toolkit is not prescriptive, nor a list of best practices. It's meant to, in quotes, inform a culture of continued learning as arts organizations become change agents in understanding and promoting the value of creating fully accessible spaces. Next slide, please. In 2018-19 for ArtsBuild Ontario, I co-chaired a diverse accessibility advisory committee of disability identified activists and consultants, along with city and gallery stakeholders. The webinars and toolkit we shepherded to fruition feature innovative ideas and solutions that go beyond AODA and building code standards to ensure accessibility and inclusion are at the forefront of building and managing creative spaces. The structure and work of ArtsBuild Ontario's advisory committee, to my mind, presents a very good model that public art programs can look to. Could I have the next slide, please? I'd like to end on this image. It's from the Twitter feed of Ukrainian Alexandra Matvichuk, a Kyiv-based human rights lawyer and head of the Center for Civil Liberties. The caption she wrote says, "People with disabilities make Molotov cocktails. This is our land, and we will defend it." Someone sent this to me when I was feeling a lot of despair these past weeks about the invasion of Ukraine and how it was impossible for many people with disabilities to get to bomb shelters and basements or to get out of the country. This photo of resistance makes me think of agency and how we as disabled people are not helpless, that we can and do use our own agency to fight for the world we want to live in. Thank you.
That was so great. Thank you, Kim. Always such a pleasure to learn about all the activism and the work that you've done and that you are still doing today. I'd like to bring Jess up.
Hi, everyone. I always jump the gun and forget about visual description. So I made a big note about that. So you're looking at a very petite, very solidly dressed androgynous individual with long blonde hair and a black shirt and a modest wine glass of cocktail shark beside. That was sarcasm. And I have some notes about them, so I'm excited to get into, including responding to my fellow panelists and the wonderful prompts of the panel moderator, Sean. But I thought, given the mood that I'm in, which is a little bit slightly down, so thanks, Kim, as well, for making space for that, with sharing some video artwork with you. So the piece is from 2016. It's called Micro Comedies, Macro Tragedies. It's silent, so you don't have to worry about sound. And you can use whatever translate. Oh, if we can pause the video and restart. Thank you. Because I'm going to have Sean Lee read the captions aloud for visual description of what is in the video. If you can just imagine a dump of the content of somebody's cell phone from 2 years, I think it was 2014 to 2016. I'm going to have Sean read the captions that appear mid-screen, as the video was intended to be for deaf and hard of hearing audiences. And so I'm going to let that play, and then I'm going to speak after.
Underneath everything in your life, there is that thing. That forever empty, forever empty, that knowledge that it's all for nothing. And that you're alone. It's down there. And sometimes when things clear away, you're not watching anything. You're in your car. And you start going, oh no, here it comes, that I'm alone. It starts to visit on you. Just this sadness. Life is tremendously sad. Just by being in it. And so you're driving, and then you go, oh, that's why we text and drive. I look around, pretty much 100% of people driving are texting. I started to get that sad feeling. I was reaching for my phone. Then I said, you know what? Don't. Just be sad. Just let the sadness stand in the way of it. And let it hit you like a truck. And I let it come, and I started to feel OMG. And I pulled over and I just cried. Like a bitch, I cried so much. And it was beautiful. Sadness is poetic. You're lucky to live sad moments. And then I had happy feelings. Because when you let yourself feel sad, your body has like antibodies. It has happiness that comes rushing in to meet the sadness. So I was grateful to feel sad. And then I met it with true, profound happiness. It was such a trip. The thing is, because we don't want that first bit of sad, we push it away with like a little phone or the food. You never feel completely sad or completely happy.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm glad I shared that to hold space for myself, which is a weird thing to say on a panel, but sometimes it gets there. I made a lot of notes of things, just taking in what everyone's shared today on an envelope of all things. But I also made a note on the back of the envelope, which perhaps is a thread I'm going to try to stay connected to, and not to be trite or metaphorical, but actually literal. And I'm going to do my best to try and tie this into everything I have to say. I don't know if it gets reversed on this camera, but I feel like you can read what it says. Anyway, I just wrote a fiction. I was really lucky to be able to attend the last panel that's live at Clive did, and quite excited that a curatorial decision was made to have not one but two creative and thoughtful panel discussions on access. I'm sure everyone on this panel with me can agree that it's often monolithically tokenized into one quick thing. So the fact that I was invited onto a panel that is preceding another panel, the generosity of a friend of mine who was on that panel is what I want to try to embody inspiration from. And I think he identifies as a painter, or like contemporary digital painting. And maybe Sean, you can type out his name for me in the chat just for the interpreters, because I'm speaking off the cuff. But Peter Owosu Ansa, his work and his generosity and vulnerability from the last live at 5 on Access was really touching, especially the place he started from around. He was sharing his work, but he was also sharing something that I feel I deeply connect to, even with your question prompts, Sean, around like, you know, what does it mean to make or receive public art that includes you, and the question of safety and resonance. And I think a lot about legibility, and Peter was not self-effacing, but just frankly honest about his acceptance of how isolating it has been and can be and continues to be as a deaf painter in an honest and text-centered art world. And when I say text-centered, like I think even everyone a part of this chat right now can agree, it's just an inundation. It's write an artist statement, it's answer 10,000 emails, it's very text heavy. And the loneliness that can kind of create as a culture. I'm in the process of getting, I don't know if anyone in Toronto knew this was possible, that you can get an eviction while you're getting an eviction. I got two, an M4 and an M12. But I feel like it's super connected to what we're all talking about in terms of public space. And I have been fortunate enough to not have to compete in the housing crisis for 10 years. I lived in the same space for 10 years, but the memories are all kind of coming back to me in terms of the ways in which disability is framed colonially. There's a colonial regard to, I just don't think we can be separated white supremacy with how we're talking about disability in public space, and the manicured performativity and demands for legibility. And, you know, I feel grateful for having opportunities to create relationships with folks who work institutionally. But there also is a kind of violence that I will do my best to not say anything without a trigger warning for folks. But there is a certain kind of violence that a lot of particularly bodied folks experience in proximity to institutions and to these invitations to be in public space, and to be asked the question of what would art look like to you that spoke to you. And Sean, your questions over email were very thoughtful, and I'd like to do my best to answer them while also not being sure if I know, because I think sometimes the suffocating demand for legibility without liability is placed on very othered bodies through a process of colonialism that I think, you know, I'm grateful, Kim, that you brought up Ukraine, because I think we're seeing a multitude of narratives right now in the way that war and conflict and, you know, the pressure and the screw turning, sorry, I'm going to try to slow down, that capitalism in Toronto puts on certain bodies first, you know, and how there's a multitude of narratives. And I think it would do a lot with public space and the job of to do large-scale site-specific installation work, which is what I do. And the video you saw at the beginning, I don't identify as a filmmaker. That's actually a large-scale 3-minute video loop. And the last time that was installed was just before the pandemic on a large outdoor screen in Lisgar Park, which is that circle of 3 condos in a neighborhood now known as the Drake Hotel. And that park is kind of just there for dogs to poop in now. I call it the poop tarmac. But I got a lot of great responses, similar, I think, feelings in my body to what you had shared, Ophira, what it means to do large-scale video work and what it means to kind of create an environment where people can gather, and there's food, and there's joy, and there's a relaxation of the body. I resonate with a lot of what you said, despite feeling a lot of sadness right now. And I think that's super connected to, I don't know if the other panelists and Sean yourself with the questions of safety, I want to make space for the way joy can be also political and also sad, and also a discussion of intersecting violence with one's own body and with one's own care communities. Because although that one is a fond memory, like, yeah, I just feel super sad today and exhausted from the ways in which ableism physically in Canada can excuse a lot of other isms in the dorms, xenophobia, like racism, being asked for for so much invasive information to qualify for affordable housing, despite being on an ESP for 10 years, only to have an opportunity to sign a lease and then have that taken away like a few hours later because my partner's ID is South African, and the ways in which that is so embedded to the way art institutions also operate. And if folks are open to talking about those topics as well within our practices, I'd love to have that conversation because, yeah, like how do you manage the burnout and not just, making, there is a way in which the pandemic has been manipulated capitalistically by folks to sort of take tools from disabled folks like yourself, Karen, like yourself, Ophira, that have been so laborious, right? And then to manipulate that as a way in to just demand more and demand more. And so I'm just really grateful to be a part of this panel today, despite sadness. I don't know, I think there's a place for sadness, and I appreciate everyone letting me share in the way I need to share today. But I think about that a lot when I set up public art with folks, is creating budgets to help educate and create new precedences for what can be allocated with arts funding, including food, including acknowledging that just leaving your house costs money in Toronto. And not to make this panel Toronto-centered, but since we are being sponsored by a Toronto-oriented conversation, and how that is connected to land back, and how that is connected to conversations that often get shrugged off. And if you do a bit of research into the history of the Toronto Purchase and like the coercive and gang nature of those things, like that is very much ongoing. And how do we embody that in an artistic practice? And then how do we do that now, even more so when it's a lot easier in a kind of faceless way and a very inaccessible in terms of the cost of money to have the tech to even join you today on Zoom. I spent the first year and a half of the pandemic, believe it or not, doing all of my administration on an iPod Touch that eventually got so overheated it separated from itself. And that is both poetic and intense to think about in terms of the representation of voices that we're now not hearing from, even though there is a kind of big access veneer that we are hearing from more voices now, just because we have the aesthetic feeling of accessibility. But I don't want to ramble too long because I'd really love to hear the Q&A and hear from other folks. And yeah, toss it back over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, and thank you for holding space for things like sadness, for like reality, right? I think disabled folks have faced such an onslaught from the pandemic, from the like necropolitics of the institutions, from the government, the eugenic policies. And so a lot of disabled folks are tired, and it is a hard time right now. And I'd love to just, also hear from Kim and Ophira as we about some of those things that you had mentioned, like public art sometimes implies, or actually public art does imply that, it's supposed to be for everyone. But as we heard from Kim, in the process of constructing public art competitions, access is often forgotten. Disability is often forgotten. And when it is remembered, it can be through that lens of like demanding legibility, demanding, you know, a colonial aspect. And I just want to open up just a question to everyone. Like, how can the experience of public art be different? How can it be intimate or be safe? And I want to open that up to just all of you, Kim, Ophira, Jess.
How can it be safe? So was that sort of the main thrust? How can it be safe?
Yeah, like how can we imagine public art otherwise? You know, how can the experience of it be safe? How can it be made for how can it actually be for us without tapping into some of those harms that Jess has sort of talked about, like the demand for, you know, needing disability to be only one thing. And Ophira, sorry, I interrupted. I think you were starting to say something, so I'll pass it to you.
That is very okay. You know, truly, the dog has not barked this entire time and just barked now. I think it's really hard because it brings up the question of, is being in public ever safe for a disabled person? Speaking for myself, I can't think of times that I truly feel safe and held in public. So it's hard to think then, you know, art is a reflection. Art is also an imagining of what could be, but when it exists in public space, if I don't feel safe in reality, how do I then feel safe in this imagined reality? There's always a little bit of inherent tension. And I think, to me, a big thought comes, and really thinking about sort of what Jess said, eviction, like, to me, sort of the opposite force of that is agency. You know, do we have agency within our space, within how we're presented? That's a question that, you know, in display came up a lot, this idea of, you know, things that are projected onto you, what do you project back out into the world? But sort of moving beyond content and into structure and space in these conversations. I don't personally have a like, oh, there's the answer, like we can just do it that way. But I do think that it's an important place to start, of thinking of how do we feel safe in public spaces and what does it mean to have agency within public spaces.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so powerful. Like, you know, can disabled people ever truly be safe in public space when the world is just so inhospitable to us and has proven that, right? We're hitting 6 o'clock, but I wonder, Kim, did you want to respond at all to that prompt as well?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of a public artwork that I felt really transported in. And I think because of that, it felt like a safe space where I could really give myself over to the work and let it take me away. It was during the Toronto Biennial of Art last year, and it was a piece that Diane Borsato did out at the Small Arms Inspection Building. She planted an orchard. She planted 40 small trees, 40 different species of apples. And I could enter into the piece, I could move around in it. It was an open piece, but I think what was transformative about it for me was this, and of course this was before the pandemic hit and this war, this sense of future that planting trees engendered in people there, this sense of future. And I think for me, I have to grab onto those kinds of moments and artworks because there's very little else that's going to give me a sense of belonging and safety and future and also agency, in that I can be a part of that work and I can think about it and I can talk about it I don't know. That's all I can say about that.
I love that, Kim. I mean, I think, yeah, public art oftentimes is about, you know, creating monuments for times that have passed and not thinking about the future. That's so powerful. I do want to note that we're a little bit past 6, so I want to respect the time of our ASL interpreters and all the access workers with us today. I also want to say, in a beautiful coincidence, that the next talk on April 13th at the same time and space is called Rethinking a Monument Landscape for the Future. So it kind of really beautifully ties into what you just said there, Kim. And yeah, I wish we had more time to chat, but I just want to thank all of you for your generous spirit, the activism, and the work that you do. Jess, you look like maybe, did you want to say something before we end off?
Wow, that's embarrassing.
No, sorry. Didn't mean to spotlight you like that. Mid shrimp.
grabs the shrimp. Just I want to honor what your role is as a moderator and not delve into anything. So maybe instead of responding to Kim in a way that's like about continuing to talk, I could turn it into like a sort of outward going thing. And Kim, I like what you shared, but sometimes I wonder about the rigorousness that we do or don't take on with institutions of art, and sometimes I can relate to wanting a reprieve, absolutely, but sometimes I wonder if we don't interrogate enough about a redirecting of where money goes, and I don't just mean adopting practices from community level like mutual aid, but an interruption of who gets to monitor money, because one thing in the process of trying to secure new housing that I've been very aware of is that, you know, like a lot of colonial mentality folks are on boards, a lot of folks on this board of directors for this affordable housing unit have maybe never considered the 2 disabled, genetically disabled from birth folks would be in a relationship with each other that's not in the definition of family. And so I often wonder if we could perhaps level up, and I'm curious if anyone else has thoughts going into the rest of the evening about like how we can be interrogating that all together in all of our practices, even places that we may think are benign, because I think that's the sneakiness of white supremacy, is to think that any space is benign, and this isn't a woe is me, it's a sadness, I think, that the systems kind of make people have to compete so intensely just to have a place to sleep. So
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And just to be vigilant of how our practices are taken up is something I think all communities have to consider, right? Thank you everyone for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure, such an honor. And as I said, next talk is April 13th, same time and space. And I will let the video play out.